Hi, I'm Rebecca. This is a video for newcomers to sourdough. There's an accompanying recipe on smellslikebread.com. I'd encourage you to read that first, or you can just read it alongside if you prefer, whatever works best for you. These are all the bits we're going to need. One large mixing bowl, the wider the brim the better. Set of digital scales. A plastic dough scraper, these are really handy. A metal dough scraper. A banneton or a proving basket. If you don't have one of these, you can use a colander lined with a tea towel. It's important to use a colander rather than a bowl because you need the air holes for ventilation. This is a recipe for 2 loaves of bread, so you'll either need 2 of these or a banneton and a large loaf tin. A razor blade. If you don't have a razor blade, then use the sharpest knife that you can find. A thermometer. This is going to save you an awful lot of headaches. It's pretty much essential to getting the right level of fermentation, finding the right dough temperature, so get yourselves one of these. A nice big cast iron pot. You're going to bake your bread in this, and it's the absolute best way of baking bread at home because it acts like an oven inside an oven and gets it really nice and hot. It also traps the steam that your bread lets off, which inhibits the formation of a crust for the first 20 minutes, allows your bread to rise really nicely, and then you're going to take the lid off, and that's when your nice crusty crust forms. Crusty crust. Strong white bread flour. Don't use plain flour, it's just not worth it. Strong wholemeal bread flour. 150 grams of your ripe sourdough levan. This you will have made last night before you went to bed, if you've been following my instructions properly. If you forgot, that's not really a problem. You can build it first thing in the morning and let it mature for 4 to 5 hours. Just make sure that it's double in size, and you can use a little rubber band to show you whether it's done that or not. Fine crystal sea salt. It doesn't have to be sea salt, but it does have to be fine. Last but not least, semolina or polenta. Now you've got all your bits together, we're going to weigh the ingredients. 650 grams of water. Oh, bang on. I'm weighing the water in grams because a milliliter of water weighs 1 gram, and it's just much easier to weigh it than use a measuring jug. It's more accurate and it's just easier. Next, 200 grams of wholemeal flour, straight into the water, and 800 grams of strong white flour. Oh, I'm out. I need to go and get some more. Now I'm just going to scrunch this together with my hand. You're not really looking to develop any strength at this point. It's just to mix the ingredients together. Make sure you don't have any unhydrated bits of flour. It's best to do this with only one hand, keeping this hand free for other things. If you have a plastic dough scraper like this, just dunk it in some water and use that to scrape your hand off. It will be quite sort of shaggy and rough, that's fine. That looks fine to me. Now I'm just going to cover this with a tea towel or a shower cap and leave it for half an hour. This first step is called an autolyse, which is just an opportunity for your flour to absorb all the water. This helps to just build up a bit of strength in the dough before you add any of the fermentation. Now that your dough has been autolysing for about half an hour, you're going to add your levan and your salt. Weigh out your levan onto one side of your dough. 20 grams of salt. I'm just keeping these separate as a precaution because salt can kill yeast. So if I'm adding it straight to the levan, I just risk it dying a little bit inside. 20 grams of water just splashed onto the salt to help it dissolve. And now I'm going to mix it with my hands. What you want to do is use your fingers to dimple the levan in. Stretch over portions of the dough onto itself, just to make sure that you're really nicely incorporating all the ingredients. You'll see quite quickly that this will start to kind of come apart in strands and layers and generally start looking pretty gross. And that's absolutely fine. It's just going to take a little bit more work. This should maybe take you like 3 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, depending on how, much you're going for it. One method I like to use to mix the dough is using your hand to replicate the action of a spiral mixer. Wet your hand and slide it under your dough like a paddle and grab onto it and kind of lift it, stretch it, drop it again, lift it, stretch it, drop it again. And just do this while you're slowly rotating the bowl, so you're grabbing in a sort of circular motion like this. This is a nice way of building up a bit of strength. So this has come together nicely. As you can see, it is nice and smooth. It's feeling really strong now, so it's providing quite a lot of resistance when I stretch it out like this. That's good. At this point, it's useful to note down the temperature of your dough. You want it to be between 25 and 27 degrees. That's the kind of sweet spot for fermentation. It's 25 degrees. That's great. From the moment your levan is mixed into your dough, fermentation begins, and it's this period that we call the bulk fermentation. So it's just useful to know how long this takes each time you mix your dough so you can keep a record of it. Now we're just going to leave this to rest for 15 minutes and then we're going to do our first fold, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. Now I'm going to show you how to do a coil fold. It's my preferred method of folding. You can do a stretch and fold, but I think a coil fold is a little bit more gentle on the dough. I think stretch and fold can risk tearing, and I just want to show you something that I think is foolproof. It also works well on wetter doughs. This is a relatively dry dough to begin with, but if you want to increase the hydration in your next loaves, then a coil fold is going to be really good for that. Get your plastic scraper and slide it down the sides of your dough just to release it from the bowl. Then with nice wet hands, slide them in at the midpoint of your dough and lift it up so that it's stretching, and set it down on itself. Then do the same thing, lift up from the middle and set it down again. If you need to wet your hands, that's fine. And then we're going to do it again, and hopefully the bottom side will lift up. There we go. Set it down on itself again. Now rotate it 90 degrees and do exactly the same thing. Just lift it up from the middle, making sure to lift it up so it stretches, and then put it down. Do it one more time and put it down. And now you should be able to see why it's called a coil fold, because it's basically just been coiled in on itself, and it's going to sit like that for 30 minutes, and then we'll do our second coil fold. In total, we're going to do 4 of these. This is the first one. The next 2 are going to be at 30-minute intervals, and the final one is going to be 45 minutes after the third one. Now that you've done your final fold, you'll need to leave your dough for around another hour and a half. However, beware a recipe that gives you a prescribed length of time for this final stage. Bulk fermentation time will depend on the particular environment of your kitchen, the ambient temperature, the original temperature of your water, the activity level of your levan, your flour. So you'll just have to learn to use your senses, intuition, and experience. So this has been fermenting for about 4 hours now, and as you can see, it's really grown. It's roughly doubled in size, which is good. It has gotten really nice and bubbly and aerated, which is exactly what you want. And if you shake the bowl, it's got a nice kind of wobble to it. So now I'm going to pre-shape it. I'm just going to tip it out onto an unfloured surface, and then I'm going to dust the top with flour. And then using my metal dough scraper, I'm just going to roughly cut it in 2. At this point, you really need to be careful with it because you don't want to knock out any of that air that you've worked so hard to get in there. Pre-shaping is essentially just creating a tautness in the skin with a rounded action with your dough knife. To do this, you need to come in at an angle with your dough scraper, and you're going to use 180-degree action to push it around and down until you have a nice tight round ball. You want to do this in as few actions as possible, really, otherwise you risk breaking the skin. And then I'll do it with the other one. I'm using the stickiness on the bottom of the dough to create the tension, so you want to make sure that your surface is unfloured. Otherwise your dough will just kind of slide across. It's the action of the dough sticking to the surface that really creates that tension, and you're just helping it along with this. There we go. These are nice and tight. I'm going to leave those for 20 minutes just to relax a little bit, and then we're going to shape. And in the meantime, I'm going to prepare my proving baskets. So the best flour to dust these with is, in my opinion, light rye. I would really advise against using plain white flour because it tends to just absorb all the water and your dough will get stuck to the banneton, which, believe me, is the saddest thing that can happen to a baker. So I'm just going to dust this with rye now. You could also use a combination of white flour and rice flour, which works really well. I think that rice flour gives a little bit of a weird crust. That's the only reason why I don't use it, but it is basically like 100% non-stick. So I'm just going to dust this lightly with a sieve. If you've got a brand new banneton or proving basket, then I would make sure that you dust it quite heavily. But if you've used one before, then it should have seasoned itself quite nicely. For my second loaf, I'm going to use a loaf tin. These are a really good insurance policy if your dough has overproved or if you've really screwed up the shape and you're worried that it's just not going to work. Anything that you put in here will come out fine. So I'm just going to oil this with some flavourless oil of some kind. And now I'm going to wash my hand. So I'm just going to dust the tops of these with flour. Just going to flip it, make sure there's a little bit of flour on the surface but not too much. And I'm just going to tease it out into a sort of roughly square shape. Now this one is going to go in the round basket, so I'm going to shape it into a round. Grabbing two corners, two opposite corners, pull them out and push them into the middle together like that. Do the same with the other corners. Now you should still have a square shape, so do the same thing. Pull and push them together. Pull and push them together. Now scrape your surface so there's no flour. Just carefully flip it over, and using the same kind of motion that you did with the pre-shape, we're just going to gently shape this into a round. You can use your hands or you can use your dough scraper. It shouldn't need too much to build a tension. That's fine. As you can see, it's nice and taut. When I press it down, it kind of bounces back. And then I'm going to flip it again and carefully place it in the banneton. Here we go. Now I'm going to shape the tin, which I'm going to do in a kind of oblong shape. On a lightly floured surface, just flip it over. Tease it out into a rough square shape. This time holding two corners like this, pull out and fold into the middle. Pull the other side and fold into the middle. So you have a rectangle. Flip it over like that. Pulling the top like this, pull it out and press it back in. And then roll it towards you. So you've got a nice spiral shape like that. You can build a tiny little bit more tension into it just by using your dough scraper to pull it gently towards you. And I'm gonna just carefully pop it into the tin seam down, so I'm not flipping it over or anything. These are now ready for a overnight sleep in the fridge. Cover them with a tea towel. If you want to stop it sticking to the tea towel, just give it a little bit of flour, but it shouldn't be too much of a problem. And we'll bake these in the morning. Good morning everyone, we're ready to bake. This should have been proving overnight in your fridge. My cast iron pot has been heating up in the oven for about 45 minutes. What I'm going to do is just scatter a little bit of semolina, or you can use polenta. I'm just going to tip my dough onto the surface. And then using my razor blade or your sharp knife, I'm just going to score it. The key here is to do it as quickly as possible. Just make sure that it's loose and tip it in. Replace the lid and just pop it back in the oven for 20 minutes. After 20 minutes is up, take the lid off so it can develop a nice crust, and you're going to bake it for 25. So it's on at 240 degrees. And that's it. Once the final 25 minutes is up, it's time to take the bread out of the oven. Smells like bread. This is just a starting point for new sourdough bakers. If you head to smellslikebread.com, I've written a little bit more about how to increase your hydration, use different flours, and add different ingredients. Thanks so much for watching, and enjoy your baking.